I'd like to welcome you to this meeting of Council. This meeting will be live streamed and recorded, and the voices and images of those participating in the meeting and in the gallery may be captured as part of this recording. We acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet and pay our respects to elders past and present. As councillors, we have all taken an oath to carry out our duties in the best interests of the people of Indigo Shire and to do this in a fair and impartial manner. We are all committed to exercising the Council's powers and functions to the best of our skills and judgments. Do we have any apologies or leave of absence? So Councillor Shepherd is an apology for this meeting. Do we have any other apologies? Do we have any declarations of conflict of interest? Item 4A, for Council to consider that item 13.2, review of Council plan, be moved to item 10.2A. To move that. Do we have a second? Is anybody against the motion? Carried. Open forum, where questions can be asked by people in the gallery, and the first one will be Ed Tyree.
Hear me now? My questions relate to the development of the climate change policy that was discussed at the last council meeting. Unfortunately, I couldn't be there, but I watched it online, and it prompted me to just ask a couple of questions in relation to some of the work I've done. Climate change is arguably the greatest global challenge we've ever faced. The impact of climate variability is affecting the whole planet, and national leadership is currently lacking with a strategy to address the impact of climate change. Where leadership is lacking, communities must take the lead. And the American cultural anthropologist Margaret Mead said, "Never doubt that a small group of committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." So it's up to us to take action now, and in the article I sent to councillors yesterday, and I think previously it was quoted that 600 councils globally have made a climate emergency declaration in Australia. Globally have made a climate emergency declaration, and in Australia 22 councils have made declarations, as well as the Australian Capital Territory government. So I ask, in developing the climate change, which a spelling mistake there, will Council consider making an impact statement similar to that of a national emergency declaration, indicating the seriousness of the situation?
CEO.
Thanks, Ed, for that question. I notice you've got question 2 and question 3, which are along similar lines. So,
do you want me to ask them?
Would you mind just asking the second and third? And I'll
question 2, in developing the climate change policy, will Council set a goal for the reduction of carbon emissions in its operations? And question 3, in developing climate change policy, will Council report on a quarterly basis on the cutting of emissions by its own operations?
So thanks, Ed. As you've sort of alluded to here, Council did release a draft climate change policy at its last meeting. So that's currently out for comment now for submissions. And at the same time, Council also issued a draft environmental strategy as well. So there's a policy and a strategy that's out there. The draft policy that's out for comment at the moment does talk about having a statement that Council will reduce our contribution to climate change by implementing and reviewing corporate emissions reduction targets and strategies. So there is a policy line that talks about Council itself reducing its emissions and strategies. Separate to that, in the budget tonight that's being considered, there is a line in there which talks about funding an emissions reductions plan. So one of the things Council needs to do when it thinks about lowering its emissions, it needs to know what its emissions actually are in the first place. It needs to find its baseline figure, and then work out a reduction target from that. So there is a plan for the next year, if the budget gets approved tonight, to do an emissions reduction plan and work out what the baseline figure is. And that plan itself then, which will come back to councils, will talk about then if there is a reduction, what that reduction might be. So at this stage, there's no specified target, but there is a longer term aspiration to review our impact. But we need to do the work to find out what the baseline is, as well as then working out a strategy for reducing our targets. I think your last question talks then about reporting of our emissions and cutting and those sorts of things. So I think, again, the emissions reduction plan will address those issues about how we go about it, how it's reported back to council and so on.
I guess my response to what you've said, if I can make one, is that making a policy statement is one thing. Doing the actions that respond to that statement is another thing. And reporting on them gives you the whole picture. Thanks very much.
Yes, Councillor Goldsworthy.
Just in relation to question one, you're talking about will council consider making an impact statement similar to the National Emergency Declaration? I can only speak for myself, Ed, but I do feel that climate change is the issue of our time and our generation, and I think it is an emergency and we need to look to do as much as we can. So it'll be my intention to certainly move towards that direction.
Thanks, Larry.
Jonathan Riley.
Just before we go on, can I actually speak to the motion from Ed very quickly?
Sure.
I also, no, you can stay there, Ed. I think it's really important that I concur with Councillor Goldsworthy. We've just had the ALGA National Conference of Local Governments put up a motion that climate change be declared as an emergency. And I think it was 138 councils in Australia backed that. 68 didn't. And so I think we are now seeing that and today I think the City of Sydney actually also declared a critical climate emergency. So I think it is something that as local governments we are needing to consider that. It will come back for decision at the next meeting, but I guess it's important for people in the community to know that there are at least some councillors on Indigo Shire Council who take this matter extremely seriously.
Jonathan Riley.
Evening, everybody. My first question to council is, does the owner of 94 Indigo Creek Road have a permit to have a shipping container size fuel tank on his property? Because this was not on the original plan.
CEO.
Jonathan, I'm not exactly sure who's at that address, but I'm guessing I know who's at that address. So we're aware of that issue and we will be talking to that property owner offline, and we'll follow up with that person and make our own inquiries and follow up on your question.
Okay. And question number 2, I've got a question regarding the permit for that operator to use Havelock Street for B-doubles. Was issued on the 10th of November 2014 and is valid for 3 years. Does council know whether this permit has been reissued? And if not, then all B-doubles have been travelling along this street illegally for the last 18 months.
CEO.
Yeah, I guess it's still a rather operational question, but I'm happy to find out the answer to that and get. I don't know the answer tonight. This has just come through, so I need to make some inquiries. I'll get those answers back to you, separate to this meeting. So I'll report that back to you.
Just on that question, as I've pointed out to you previously, the damage to infrastructure surrounding that area is a reason by the guidelines for the National Heavy Vehicle Register to have that permit revoked anyway. And I believe that, you know, the community should have consultation in regard to that issuing of the permit also. Thank you. And my third question for council is, after giving up land from the Indigo Shire Council to the Wodonga Council, will the Indigo Shire Council negotiate for ratepayers to get industrial land for Barnawatha at Logic?
So, Jonathan, I think my understanding of your question, I don't believe it's correct to say that Indigo Shire gave any land to Wodonga Council. What I am aware of is there was a boundary realignment of the Indigo Shire versus the Wodonga Council. So the land itself in question would have been owned by the operators of the rail terminal. So we're talking about a thin sliver of land, and just for the purpose of administrative efficiency, rather than having a parcel of land cross over two councils, there was a small realignment of the boundaries so that the boundary went around the parcel of land. And so the owners of the land was always the rail terminal operators.
I understand that, but it's you know, it was something that, you know, that between the two councils you negotiated that area, and I just wonder whether or not you might, between the two councils, negotiate land out there that could be used for industrial purposes.
Well, the whole of the site's land used for industrial purposes.
I beg your pardon?
The whole of the site's used for industrial purpose. I'm not sure there's...
Well, you know, there's land out there that's still in the Indigo Shire Council that's zoned industrial, but I just wonder whether or not, you know, there could be a bit of advocation, considering we've got this draft plan or structure plan for Barnawatha going on presently. I just wonder whether or not it could be something that could be, you know, discussed, maybe negotiated with. That's what I'm aiming at.
I'm not sure there's any basis for Indigo Council to get industrial land for Barney at Logic from Wodonga Council. So
I just thought you
Just
might be
leave it
able to just work in with the area that it's all industrial out there. I just wonder whether something could be done for it. That's my question. I just a bit of advocation, because we don't, you know, industrial land at Barnawatha is obviously an issue. You know, we're getting transport depots pop up in various places.
yeah. So I think that'll be
Just
able
something for you to have a think
I
about.
think it'll be able to be dealt with in the structure plan. So.
You might add that to the draft structure plan as a suggestion then.
Okay.
Thanks a lot, Jonathan.
Thank you.
Robin McLeish.
Thank you and good evening. My first question is, where is our $1 million? The budget identifies that the federal government is now providing approximately $1 million for ageing well, relieving the council of the requirement to obtain these funds from our rates. I had anticipated a rate reduction for 2019-20 now that council no longer is required to provide funds for this activity, but instead our rates and charges have increased by $541,300. So where's our $1 million?
I'm not sure about that question, but the CEO.
I don't understand the question either, Robin. And in your questions, I noticed you haven't given us any detail about what you meant by that. So I'm hearing the question for the first time rather than at 6 o'clock. So we're not aware of government giving us $1 million for ageing well. Certainly with the home care transition, there was a saving from the budget, and that was taken out of the budget last year. So there was a reduction with council transitioning home care services to another provider. But there's no $1 million to answer for.
Well, I was under the impression that the federal government had provided approximately $1 million for aged care and relieving council of that responsibility. How much did the federal government provide to council? Sorry, how much do they provide to the service providers to relieve council of that responsibility.
No money coming our way. So there's no $1 million coming our way. So
No, it's not coming your way. It's going to the providers so that you don't have to collect it from rates.
We wouldn't know how much money is paid to the service providers. You're talking about from the NDIS.
Well, you would know that, what was it, approximately 7 FTEs were removed from the council in terms of providing those services.
I think it was a lot more than 7. That's right, Councillor Trenery?
I was just going to say that and the report goes back 12 months ago nearly now, but I think there was a saving of about $300,000 in that report. Robin, off the top of my head, and I'm happy to be corrected for that. So, but that was going to be the saving in this financial year. It was the $300,000 by allowing someone else to do those services.
Okay.
I can confirm, Councillor, that you're right. Last year in the 18-19 budget, with the transition of home care to an outside provider, council did lower its budget by $300,000. It also still retained, though, an ageing well officer. So there was a net reduction to the budget last year, and it came out of the budget of about $200,000.
Question number 2, since 2009, how much have ratepayers been charged for landfill rehabilitation? Where is this money, and when will the rehabilitation work commence?
Greg Pinkerton?
Thank you, Robin, for the question. It's a good question. It's one that I think the community would be quite interested in. The waste area is made up of a number of funding sources, and so the direct answer to your question is that council doesn't collect a specific amount from ratepayers for landfill rehabilitation, but it is part of the fees and charges that are collected. So I've got a 10-year analysis which I was able to get quickly for you. Over the last 10 years, council has collected a little over $23.5 million, which includes the curbside collection, the environmental management contribution, and income from other sources such as recycling. So total income has been $23,600,000. Over that same period of time, council has spent $24,700,000 and a bit of loose change on those activities. And so in the landfill rehabilitation part, it's around $3.6 million. So the headline of this, though, is that there's 23.6 mil collected and 24.7 spent, which is a deficit position of about $1 million.
Sorry, you're talking about landfill rehabilitation, you said spent?
No. This, at the start of my answer, I was saying these are all amounts that are collected together. So it's a little bit complicated. And the reason why I think it's a timely question is that we've reported those financials several times to council and to the public, but it's always been council reporting. And recently there was a question put to the Ombudsman, which allowed a great opportunity for the Ombudsman to quiz council about how this money has been collected and how it's been spent. And so for the first time, we've got an independent view that backs up council's view, and that's in the agenda in the budget adoption report. So there's a couple of quotes that are probably worth reading from the Ombudsman. So these are not council's words, these are the Ombudsman's words that say Indigo has been transparent in charging of its waste management charge. Goes on to say Indigo's budget and recorded minutes clearly itemises each component of the fees. Indigo is not profiting from the fee. The information provided by Indigo indicates it is charging only for reasonable costs associated with the fee. Council is only using the funds for genuine environmental management contribution activities. And finally, they say the Ombudsman is satisfied that Indigo has administered Section 162B consistent with the intent of the Local Government Act. It's demonstrated that the funds associated with the environmental management charge are contributing towards the reasonable costs of facilitating related services, and that is not profiting from this fee. So you know, the financials have been reported. We've said for a long time that that we're quite comfortable with how that, that fee has been collected and the use for things such as the landfill rehabilitation. It's nice to have that, that from the Ombudsman to provide some backup to the community.
Yes, it's unfortunate that the Ombudsman was confused with the question I asked. I never asked whether the waste management fees associated with contractors had been inflated, as was the case with Wodonga. I asked for specific identification of the components of the environmental management contribution. Your reply to me indicated the areas that you were including in that. And when you were in the position to talk to the Ombudsman about it, you apologised that the information was incorrect and you were really looking at what you would do in the future. But you didn't send me an apology to say that you'd sent the wrong information, and you've never provided the correct information.
You've asked the question, which is
I'm asked a question
about the land.
Yes,
the
please
question
answer
that
that.
you submitted was about the landfill rehabilitation. That's a very different issue about what was said at a meeting a long time ago. We know that you've taken this to the Ombudsman. The Ombudsman has given us a clean bill of health. I don't know why you continue to raise it now, and you should go to question 3.
Well, I can understand why you don't want me to continue, but I shall continue to pursue it.
I
want the question that I raised, I want answered. How much money have you collected for landfill rehabilitation?
We'd need to check the last annual report, but the figures that I was able to get in the last half hour is about 3.6 mil.
I cannot find this in the annual report. I can find your provision, but not what you've collected. And your provision's only a contingent liability. It's not cash. I want the cash that these people, the ratepayers, have contributed for this function, and nothing's been done for 10 years. And EPA and the council can't agree what to do.
Robin, if you want to start to really question, you've asked the question, you've had the answer, you're not happy with it.
How much money has been contributed for landfill rehabilitation? Just answer the question.
So council doesn't have a specific charge for landfill rehabilitation. What council does have is an environmental management charge, as well as some other fees. So over the last 10 years, that environmental management charge has been $4.9 million, but that doesn't just solely go to landfill rehabilitation. That's why the only sensible way of looking at this is looking at the money that comes in for waste management activities and the money that goes out for waste management activities, including landfill. And I know that you have a different view on that, but your view doesn't mean that changes the figures. And that's why I was saying it's quite nice that we have now a position where the Ombudsman has looked at this, and we know that the Ombudsman is very interested in this matter. And so instead of you having one opinion and us responding constantly with the same answer, I'm quite happy that we now have this independent view that supports, and I've read it out, supports that council has been operating in a transparent and appropriate way.
Simple budget item or a simple ledger item, landfill rehabilitation. How much is in it?
Approximately 3.6 mil.
Good, thanks. That's the answer I was after. Now I can go to my next question.
You'll get an update. The new financial reports that will be done in the next month, we'll give you an update of that.
Why is council proposing to borrow $500,000 for the Epic Mountain Bike Trail when we have cash in hand to afford this expenditure? We've got $3.6 million that's been put aside for landfill rehabilitation for the last 10 years. We've done no work. And your response...
CEO is about to answer your question, Robin.
Okay, I'll just
You've asked the question.
Give the response that
about the Epic Bike Trail.
Our council...
CEO.
When council was asked why they'd changed from a financial reserve that was protected and clearly identified what the money
That's right, Robin, it's not recording. You've asked the third question. You've asked the third question. You've asked the third question. The CEO would like to answer it if you would like to receive the answer.
When I finish explaining the question, yes.
The question is, why is council proposing to borrow $500,000 for the Epic mountain bike trail when we have cash in hand to afford this expenditure? Do you want the question answered?
The cash in hand gets changed from a reserve that was protected and clearly identified what the money was used for. And council has replied, council does not generally set aside cash for reserves due to the fact that this practice could be costly and financially inefficient. Let's be efficient. Let's put $500,000 into the bike trail and leave money out of the loan application. Too hard for you? Thank you. Thanks for the time. Very interesting. Thank you, Ron.
Item 6, condolences. Councillor Murdoch.
Yes, I think everybody can hear me, I hope. Mary Dunn of Rutherglen passed away on the 28th of May this year. She was a wonderful woman, really hard worker. She was Indigo Shire's current Citizen of the Year, and she was awarded the honour for demonstrating a lifelong commitment to helping others and bringing people together. Her unwavering support and friendship for many underprivileged families was an inspiration. Having lived in Rutherglen for over 50 years, Mary's community involvement spanned more than a dozen organisations, including Rutherglen Primary and High Schools, Rutherglen Hockey Club, Rutherglen and District Garden Club, and Meals on Wheels. Amongst the long list of valuable contributions to these organisations, Mary played an integral role in developing the annual Rutherglen and District Garden Club Flower Show, bringing regional gardens together and highlighting Rutherglen on the map for visitors to the region. Mary was awarded the life membership in a number of these organisations, and as a result of her continued passions and efforts, she was a fantastic person. I knew her, and I've had the pleasure of having to drive around Rutherglen with her and point out everything that was wrong so that I could try and get it fixed. She had lots of patience. She was a wonderful person. So our condolences go out to David and the rest of Mary's family. And could we have a letter under seal?
Would you like to move a motion that we send a letter under seal regarding condolences? Moved by Councillor Murdoch, seconded by Councillor O'Connor. Is anybody against? Carried. Item number 7, the recommendation is that the minutes of the ordinary council meeting held on the 28th of May 2019 and special council meeting held on the 13th of June 2019 as published on council's website be confirmed. Would somebody like to move that recommendation? Moved by Councillor Price, seconded by Councillor Murdoch. Is anybody against? Carried. Business arising from the previous minutes. There were some questions taken on notice. They were addressed by Ian Allett and are in the council agenda for those who would wish to read them. Is there any other business arising? Item number 9, deputations and petitions. Councillor Trenery.
I was handed a petition today, Mr Mayor, and this follows on some good work Indigo Shire has done in the past in regards to a footpath between a motel that's slightly out of town leading into town. And I know Ian Allett, Director of Infrastructure Services, had a lot to do with that and working with Vic Roads to get that done. As an upgrade to that, the applicants of the petition asked for the installation of street lights in various locations along pathways for the safe passage of pedestrians in traffic. And that's the heading for it, and there's also 87 signatures on it.
Would you like to move that petition be tabled?
Happy to move that this petition be tabled.
Do we have a second? That's right, Councillor Murdoch. Is anybody against? The document's tabled. Item 10.1, the recommendation is that Council accepts the monthly financial report as of the 31st of May 2019. Would somebody like to move that recommendation? Moved by Councillor Goldsworthy, seconded by Councillor Trenery. Councillor Goldsworthy.
Just to say that we continue to be in a favourable financial position. Our capital works are progressing, still potentially not as fast as we would like. It looks like that at this stage we've got about $8.5 million in the bank, but that will be decreased considerably over the coming months. There has been some work done, the capital works, so we're doing it slowly but surely. So the weather's had a bit of an impact, but we're still looking financially okay. We've had some savings in the area of staff, and we've had some additional grants come in, which will all be expended next financial year.
Councillor Trenery.
There's not a lot to add. We've ended up favourable at this stage of 469,000. 314,000 is additional income, and 155,000 is from expenses. So it's a good job both sides.
Would anybody else like to speak to the motion? Councillor Murdoch.
Yeah, I'd just like to say that, you know, budgets are budgets, and there are a lot of figures and a lot of work to get them done. But I'm also pleased that out of the last budget, Chiltern got a new kitchen in their elderly citizens, the senior citizens hall, and it looks fantastic. So that's what happens with all the things that we do, is they actually make things that the community needs and give services. But I will say the kitchen at Chiltern looks fantastic. Thank you.
Would anybody else like to speak to the motion? Councillor Goldsworthy. Is anybody against the motion? Carried. Item 13.2, the recommendation is the Council adopts the reviewed and updated Council Plan 2017 to 2021 as attached. Somebody?
Sorry, your budget submission first.
10.2. The recommendation is that Council considers and notes the attached budget submissions and officer responses. 2, endorses the attached recommendations in relation to each of the 2019-2020 budget submissions, makes no changes to the budget as a result of the submissions, and 4, directs Council staff to respond to each submitter with a copy of this report and attached summary of officer recommendations and Council resolution. Would somebody like to move that recommendation? Moved by Councillor O'Connor, seconded by Councillor Price. Councillor O'Connor.
This is just really to say thank you to the people that submitted. As Councillor Murdoch just said, the budget's a pretty hefty document, goes out, and it's always pleasing to see people actually be willing to read it and to make submissions and contribute their thoughts back. While we haven't made a change to the budget based on those submissions, we did take them all into consideration. People had the opportunity to speak to those, to their submissions as well, and a number of you did that. And so I just want to thank those of you that have participated in this process, and I guess to reassure the community that we do listen to your views. We also, of course, listen to the advice of our staff, and in the end, Council will make a decision tonight as to whether or not we pass the budget that has been put forward to us. So it's a big process, and it's great to see community get involved in that process. So thank you.
Councillor Price.
I'd echo some of Councillor O'Connor's remarks in thanking people for putting their submissions forward. This is a process that we have to undertake as part of the budget. It's a requirement from the Local Government Act, and so it can leave us feeling quite disappointed when we can't resolve any of these submissions in terms of the budget. But I hope that you'll take on board the officers' comments, and so that we can feed your submission into the council processes somewhere along the line, and give it some consideration through our normal processes.
Councillor Goldsworthy.
First of all, I'd like to acknowledge those that did make submissions, and I'll point out in particular Robin McLeish. Robin's been a long time contributor, and he's probably the one person that actually goes through the budget almost line by line, looking to improve the document itself. He's not looking for funds to fund a lot of the worthy things that people ask for, but he's actually looking to improve our budget, so thank you for that. For those that have asked for funds, it is very difficult because most of them are very worthy, and we do have limited funds, albeit that we look like having a significant cash surplus this time round. And some of the difficulty for us is around the processes and where does it fit in relation to our strategies, and if we go and do a council plan and then take in submissions, where do we go from there if we're not abiding by a council plan? So it is really difficult, and it's not a process that's enjoyable at all, but thank you for making the submissions. And hopefully there are some positives that come out of those submissions that are made.
Councillor Trenary.
Councillor Golworthy just beat me. I'd just like to thank Robin for the time and effort that he puts into this, the work that goes in, and I employ people to, if they're going to have a look at this and aren't bored by the budget completely, I particularly like going through the budget, but I'd suggest that you read Robin's submission. It's got some really good things in it, and I know in regards to moving forwards, a lot of these things were debated in this room, so I really do appreciate the effort, the time and effort you've put in. I know in regards to footpaths and cycle paths, there was a big discussion around that for good reason. That was certainly highlighted to me because of your report, and some of the aspects of the employee costs as well was highlighted because of your report. I really do appreciate the effort you put in. Thank you.
So, Councillor O'Connor, do you wish to sum up?
Just to reiterate our thanks and to say exactly as Councillor Goldsworthy said, you know, we are limited by the amount of money we have. No one wants their rates put up. We don't have massive revenue sources such as metropolitan councils have from parking and those kind of revenues. Therefore, we're very limited by our budget. It's not a mark of what is worthy in terms of what gets funded, because we would love to fund a lot more than what we do. Therefore, we have to prioritise, and as Councillor Goldsworthy said, we use our council plan and strategies to do that prioritising. So for those of you that are disappointed that what you asked for did not get in, I'd say don't give up. It just means we didn't have the funding this time around. And we are looking at ways of improving how we can help support funding, particularly community events and things like that. So we're taking it into consideration, and as I think we all know in our everyday... I didn't have it on. Anyway, you've heard. Okay, so yeah, that's it.
Is anybody against the motion? Carried. Take two, item 13.2. The recommendation is the council adopts the reviewed and updated council plan 2017 to 2021 as attached. Somebody like to move that recommendation? Moved by Councillor Goldsworthy, seconded by Councillor Murdoch. Councillor Goldsworthy. Councillor Murdoch? Would anybody else like to speak to the motion? Councillor Goldsworthy? Sorry, Councillor Trenary.
I'd just like to note that a new action 146, develop a reconciliation action plan, I think is vital for Indigo Shire to do, and we participate in that and try to bring as many groups, Indigenous groups involved and get that plan done. And I'm really happy to see that staff have brought that forward.
Would anybody else like to speak to the motion? Councillor Goldsworthy. Is anybody against? Carried.
Just with this next item, if I could put a slight amendment to the motion that's, or the recommendation that's there. That's 10.3.
Do you want me to say what 10.3 is?
You go for it, I just wanted to get in early to put
Sure. I certainly won't read the whole three. Item 10.3, the recommendation is the council, having given public notice in accordance with section 129 of the Local Government Act 1989 and having received and considered submission, adopts the attached budget, including the budgeted financial statements as defined by the Local Government Finance and Reporting Regulation 2014 for 2019-2020. And Councillor Goldsworthy, you'd like to have an amendment to that recommendation?
So just saying that including a 9.9A, that the budget for festivals and events grants be increased from $26,000 to $30,000, and a new community events grant be created with a budget of $15,000. Part B to that section would be that the funds for these grants be taken from the accumulated surplus.
Seconded by Councillor O'Connor. Councillor Goldsworthy.
There has been some discussion and some disappointment around the grants that are provided for festivals and events, and due to some questions that were raised, the meeting of the Indigo Economic Development and Tourism Advisory Committee meeting on the 12th of June, a motion was put up and passed by the committee members to reflect the motion that I've put up today, and that is that the amount of the grants that should be increased from $26,000 to $30,000. The feeling behind that was that it hasn't been increased for a number of years, at least 5 years that I'm aware of. It's remained at $26,000. And the second part of that, that particular motion was that there be a community grant made for $15,000. And the thoughts around the room in relation to that was the tourism and economic development grants at the moment target particular aspects of increasing tourism visitation and promoting events that will enhance the economy. What they do miss out on is some of our community events. And so last year there was a situation where some long-term community events like the Chiltern Rodeo, like the Tangambalanga Milk Run, they weren't provided any funds, and where they have been in the past. So what I'm proposing, is, or what the committee is proposing and what I'm putting up today, is that there be a separate fund allocated for community events in whatever form that may be. It may be the local business chamber putting in for a community grant of, say, $1,000 for Christmas decorations. It may be just running those community events that don't necessarily have an economic aspect to them, but have a community aspect to them. So that's why I'm looking to do it. The reason why the Part B to the motion was that it come out of the accumulated surplus, and I'm not looking to make savings on existing budget items, is because we were fortunate enough to receive a late increase in the federal government financial assistance grants to the tune of some $170,000. It means that over 2 years we'll have a cash surplus of $446,000. And so financially, it's a road to recovery. And I say that because despite my earlier comments around us having $8.5 million in the bank at the moment, at least $5 million of that is already committed to projects, and there's reserves and requirements that we have to, or obligations that we need to be able to fulfil. And so we're slowly building back up what we do have in surplus in our operating account, and this $446,000, less the $19,000 that I'm proposing that we take out, will go a long way for that. So I think we can do both. We can support the community, we can have a grant that helps everybody, and we can still have a good surplus.
Councillor O'Connor.
I completely agree with Councillor Goldsworthy. While it's not usual practice to have a last-minute change to the budget, and it's not ideal, in this case, the committee that Councillor Goldsworthy is representing here tonight, which is the Indigo Economic Development and Tourism Committee, only met last week and put up this proposal, so it's only been able to come to us tonight. I fully endorse the idea that for $15,000, which is, of course, quite a small sum of money overall, we are opening that up to community organisations and groups and individuals even for events that will enhance the communities, and that is really, really important. I wish it was more than that, but it is important that we retain a surplus, and I think it's a financially responsible way of doing a small but significant thing for our communities who otherwise wouldn't be eligible for the grants that we currently have. So that's the reason that we're doing it tonight, and I would ask my fellow councillors to kind of make an exception tonight for what is not a large amount of money, but we know it would make a huge difference to an event like the Chiltern Rodeo, which deserve the support that we were not able to give them through the Tourism Committee grants.
Councillor Trenery.
Some might be surprised that I'll speak in favour of this motion since I've been fighting for 6 years to get surplus and start turning the cash amount around. I, for one, when we passed the policy in regards to tourism, didn't think the Chiltern Rodeo would then miss out on funding because of that policy, and it was really disappointing. I think by most councils are really disappointed that was the case. I think $446,000 is a small surplus considering we've got an over $30 million budget, but I think that this is such an important priority and does what council should do, is give back to community and make sure community's got the biggest say in that money. I think is vital, so I will support the motion.
That's right, Councillor Price.
I have a question for Councillor Goldsworthy. Normally, as you said, this would go through a process, and once a committee makes this suggestion to council, it would come through a process where it would generally go to briefing and we would discuss it. How can you be confident that this is the right amount for both of these funding streams, that $15,000 is the right amount for community events, grants, and an increase of $4,000 is in the ballpark of the right amount for the other stream?
I'll take words from one of my other councillor colleagues and say we'd love more, because, look, can I be sure that it's right? No, because of last year's events, there were half a dozen that were funded. Some were funded to the full amount that they asked for, but we're looking at probably $4,000 per event. Would we love to be able to fund events to $20,000, $30,000 to actually really make a difference? That would be fantastic. $4,000 is a very small measure, and it probably only just cuts muster for inflation over the time that it's been stagnant at 26. In relation to the community events, we have no idea. $15,000 we hope will be enough. Doesn't mean to say it will be spent. What it will be is when the criteria are developed and it's put out there, hopefully we have the community applying for it, and I'm pretty sure that they will, because every dollar counts, and you can do a lot with $15,000 in the hands of the community.
I've got a question as well, because council currently has community grants. I don't expect you to know the exact amount, but I think it's about $46,000.
You're quite correct. There is a community grant, but in general, of the belief that goes towards infrastructure items. So it's not to run events. It's more you have to. I stand to be corrected on this one, but my understanding is that it's generally to pay for items that, whether it's coaching or purchase of equipment or building something, but not to run an event.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure. I'm a bit like you, but I'll take your word for it, unless the director, do you know? Or I'm sorry, perhaps Kate.
I've just quickly checked, and the amount in the draft budget this year is $47,500 for the community grants. I believe that events can be considered, but usually the pressure on those those community grants is so broad that it's rare that an event actually gets funded under that stream.
Would anybody else like to speak to the motion? This is only about the amendment. This is not. No, he's moved an amendment. I realise you said yeah, no, but I took it as an amendment, and he was talking to the amendment. We'd vote on the amendment.
There's a recommendation up, not a motion up, and so he's moved the recommendation as a motion, which is included in the words he's put in there, as I understand it. That's exactly. It's the entire motion. It's the entire motion. None of us have spoken about the budget or spoken about the amendment. That's why when someone asked me a question, I think about the budget.
All right.
It was a very long amendment.
Can I ask a question of James, please? What do you think of the budget, James?
No, well, the debate on this hasn't finished yet. Oh, well, go on, James, you can speak to the motion.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So I'd just like to point out a few facts. The total income is $32 million. Rates increases 2.5%, which is at the capped amount, to a total of 16.873 million. Total expenses of 30.07 million. Total capital works is 10.814 million. At the cash, at the end of the year, 1920, is 3.128 million, which I think is something that should be probably highlighted and something we should work on. When we look at other rural councils that have cash at the end of the year around about $10 million in similar size, it's probably something that this council should focus on to increase. There's $1 million of borrowings, but borrowings will be down. Total borrowings at the end of 1920 of 2.337 million is down from the previous year, which I think is absolutely fantastic. But I'd just like to say, and I'm sure the Mayor and others will talk about it, but the staff, and in particular Phil, who's in the room at the moment, has done huge amounts of work. This is a big project, and there's a lot of regulations involved in it. There's a lot of input from councillors all over the place, as well as staff and community, and it's a very hard document to put together. So I'd just like to congratulate Phil on his work. Thank you.
Would anybody else like to speak to this item? I'll just say this. If this was an amendment, I would vote against it, but I'm certainly not going to vote against the budget. But I'd like to comment that currently the tourism budget for this shire, which is a small rural shire, is 1.79 million. This addition to the budget takes it up to 1.81 million, and there's a lot of other capital works. People have been waiting for infrastructure for years and years to increase the tourism budget to this amount. However, do you wish to sum up, Councillor Goldsworthy?
We have a great budget. I will reiterate James's thoughts. Well done, Phil. Well done, Greg, and well done, CEO. It does take a lot of work, and even this small amendment will take some doing to correct the paperwork. It's well worth it. We have many themes throughout our council plan, whether it's the community or the economy. My minor amendment goes to assist both. A lot of it's about giving back to the community. And we have a strong budget, and we'll end up in a cash surplus over the 2 years. So I commend this budget for adoption.
Is anybody against the motion? Carried. Item 10.4, the recommendation is the Council adopts the attached procurement policy 2019. Would somebody like to move that recommendation? Moved by Councillor O'Connor, seconded by Councillor Murdoch. Councillor O'Connor.
Well, yeah, I can't say I feel very passionate about this, clearly, because I wasn't jumping out of my skin to move it, but it is an important policy. There are other items tonight that I feel more passionate about, so you'll forgive me. It is an important policy, and I think that what we have done, or what the staff have done well in this policy, is balance out not just the financial bottom line, but also look at social implications, local procurement, environmental impacts, and a range of other things that, if you like, create the true bottom line, not just the dollars. So I'm pleased to see a procurement policy that is more complex than just the, what's the cheapest option. And I think the staff have created a sensible policy that's weighted accordingly. And, my congratulations again to them, and I'm happy to commend this policy.
Councillor Murdoch.
I think, like anything else, especially when we're handling public money, that we do need to have policies in place to make sure that we handle it properly. And this is another one of those, I'm trying to think of the next word, another one of those things that we have to make sure that when we do spend the money that you people give to us for those services, that we deliver, that we do it properly, and we do it with boundaries around it that makes sure that we spend it properly, and that you will feel happy that we've done it properly, and we feel happy that our minds are clear that we haven't done anything wrong. So that's to make us that way.
Would anybody else like to speak? Councillor Chenery.
Everyone wants to speak about it now. Just very quickly, I agree with Councillor O'Connor in regards to adding into it the weighting towards local businesses. I think that's very important, and I note that was something that the CEO pushed for that was really appreciated. But the important part is too that council's oversight on purchases hasn't been diminished at all, as happens sometimes with procurement policies changing, but our oversight is exactly the same as it was in the past, and so that's a very important part of it.
Would anybody else like to speak to the motion? Councillor O'Connor.
I'm fine.
Is anybody against the motion? Carried.
Sorry.
Item 10.5, the recommendation is the council accepts the attached Assembly of Councillor records. Would somebody like to move that recommendation? Moved by Councillor Price, seconded by Councillor Goldsworthy. Councillor Price.
This is just procedural. We have to do this to comply with the Local Government Act.
Would anybody else like to speak to the motion? Is anybody against the motion? Carried. Item 10.6, the recommendation is the council notes the Q Springs Water Extraction Facility monitoring report content and the action undertaken where required. Would somebody like to move that? Moved by Councillor O'Connor, seconded by Councillor Price. Councillor O'Connor.
This is just a monthly monitoring in relation to the water mining extraction process in Stanley, and to ensure that both the operator and the community complies with all the standards, and it's pleasing to see that once again that is the case.
Councillor Price. Would anybody else like to speak to the motion? Is anybody against? Carried. Item 10.7.
I'd like to move an alternate motion, Mayor.
I'll just say what the heading is. I won't say. The heading is a 12-lot subdivision and native vegetation removal, Yakandanda, Wodonga Road, Yakandanda. Application by EDM Group. Councillor O'Connor.
I move that council...
Just slowly for the sake of the minutes.
Oh, okay. I move that council refuse the application for the subdivision of CA1 Section F Wodonga Yakandanda Road, Yakandanda, on the following grounds. 1. The application fails to respect and respond to the existing neighbourhood character of the low-density residential area in proximity to this site. 2. The proposed design response undermines relevant policies within the Indigo planning scheme that seek to protect both the village atmosphere of the existing township and the entrances into this town from the surrounding rural areas. 3, the proposed design undermines planning policies relating to the preservation and protection of the National Trust landscape classification for the Yakandanda Township. 4, the proposed plan fails to adequately provide for stormwater management and would have an adverse effect on the adjacent creek. And 5, the proposed design solution has an excessive reliance on the use of battle axe blocks and fails to provide an adequate street frontage for two of the proposed allotments.
Would somebody like to second that motion? Seconded by Councillor Price. Councillor O'Connor.
I think that we have had a great deal of input from the community around this. There is a very high level of concern in the Yakandanda community, not only from those that have put in submissions, and I think it was 39 submissions that were put in, but also from people that have just spoken to me just in passing, in the street, wherever I've been, at work, people saying to me just how concerned they are. Yakandanda is an absolutely unique town. I mean, it has been on the ABC twice now because it is seen as unique around the country. Therefore, the entrances into the town from both directions are incredibly important. We know that we need development and we know that we need to allow for growth in our townships, and of course Yakandanda is a destination people rightly want to come and live in. But it's very important that that development occur in a way that is sympathetic and does nothing to destroy the unique fabric of this town. So I feel very strongly that we cannot accept the proposal as it stands, and therefore I ask Council to refuse this proposal on the grounds that I have stated.
Councillor Price. Councillor Trenery.
The fact of the matter is that we're in a situation that if we refuse it, and we don't have real grounds to refuse it, as it applies the zoning low density it's been zoned low density for the last 20 years. It complies to all our regulations. If it goes to VCAT, which is going to cost $80,000, and the downside to that is we lose control. At the moment, we're putting controls all over this subdivision in the attachment, and if it goes to VCAT, we no longer have those same controls. So I'm really concerned about refusing that. I note the staff had looked at, and we asked the staff to look at all the information that was sent to us by community, and I've had quite a few people in Yakandana approach me, and I understand their concerns. But I think their concerns, from my point of view, will be better looked after if Indigo Shire controls this. If VCAT controls it, then we have less of a say in it. And I think this motion takes us to VCAT and takes the control away from us. So I will not be voting for this motion.
Councillor Goldsworthy.
I've read the submissions. There are common themes amongst many of them, and those concerns have been addressed by the staff in relation to or against our plan, their planning scheme. And I get the concerns, like nobody really wants to see change, particularly if you've grown up in a particular area and it's always been this way. But the facts of the matter are that ever since the Indigo Shire was formed, it's been zoned the way it is now. If you drive past that site, given the proposed development, you'll probably see one building, given that there's from the road a rise of at least 5 metres for an earthen bank, and then there's already trees that are in the way, and there's proposed screening in there. It is difficult because you read the submissions and you want to go with the community, but our decision guidelines clearly state what we're supposed to consider. We're supposed to consider the planning scheme. Everything that's required of the applicant has been complied with. I do believe that if it goes to VCAT, and it may not or it may, but if it does go, with the recommendation of the staff and the compliance with the planning scheme, the applicant would be successful. So on that reason, I would also say that we shouldn't vote for the amendment as put up, and we should actually accept this as it is.
Would anybody else like to speak to the motion? Councillor Murdoch.
Yeah, I did go to YAC this morning and decided that, as Councillor Goldsworthy, thank you, was saying that he has looked at the entrance and how it's sheltered from the road. I drove up and down that road quite a few times until somebody actually pulled me over and said, "You look very lost. Is there something wrong?" Which just shows you the type of people Yakandanda have in it. But I must admit, I'm very loath not to vote for this because if it goes to VCAT, you might end up with worse conditions than we've got now. So I think at the present moment it's been quite well thought out, and yes, that's fine.
Just before I ask Councillor Price to speak, I'd just like to make a comment that the Section 173 agreement on page 36 of the agenda, I think, safeguards this subdivision. And I certainly agree with Councillor Trennery. If this goes to VCAT, I believe that the developer would win and the Section 173 agreement would be weakened. So, Councillor Price.
I've followed this application since it came to us and attended the planning focus meeting where a number of the submitters spoke very strongly and made their case. As Councillor O'Connor said, we've had submissions right up until the beginning of our meeting tonight, making the case very strongly. It seems ridiculous that we would be doing a YAC placemaking plan alongside a planning application such as this. This goes against the fabric of Yakandanda. It sets a whole new precedent for the area, and it's not in keeping with why people move to Yakandanda. I think that although some councillors are forecasting what would happen at VCAT, I don't see that as part of our role. I see that we need to take into account the permit before us and take into account the impact that it's going to have on the community and make the decision for the most people, the best decision for the most amount of people for the longest period of time. And so I'll be voting to refuse this application tonight.
Councillor O'Connor.
I really understand the position put by the people who are speaking in opposition to what I've said. I think it's quite true that if this goes to VCAT, it's possible that that will find in favour of the developer. However, I really resent sitting on council where I am hamstrung by the threat of VCAT. I was elected to represent the people in my community. It's a very unfair thing that we have to deal with as councillors. We have stood up time and time again, actually, and I think the most obvious one to me is the Q Springs water mining issue, where we knew full well that that would go to VCAT. We were told clearly that we would lose, and yet we felt, most of us felt, that we had a very strong responsibility to do what was right by the community. I feel that again this time. I'm not opposed to development. I do not think that it's wrong to have new housing in Yakandanda, but I do think that this proposal in this location with the designs that I've seen are not in keeping with what the people of Yakandanda want and value in their town. I live in a town that I love. I really understand how important it is that we do everything we can. The decisions we make tonight stand forever for the community. We go home to wherever we live and we're done. We're not on council in the next term and we're done. But I'm very mindful of our responsibility when we sit at a table tonight and make a decision. And yes, it might get overturned and that would be a great shame, but I still think in the meantime we should do everything we can to represent what is an absolutely clear position from the Yakandanda community. I have not heard anyone other than the developer say that they want this to go ahead. So in that kind of level of opposition, and with the commitment that I've seen from this community, and in a community that is as unique as Yakandanda is, and not all communities are like that, I feel I cannot in conscience support this development.
I'll now put it to a vote. This is not a vote on the recommendation. This is on the motion as put by Councillor O'Connor. All those in favour? Against? Lost.
Mr Mayor, can I forecast an alternative motion?
I was going to move the recommendation, so if that lapsed, then the council can move
I've
an
got an
alternative.
alternative recommendation, Mr Mayor.
We've just had an alternative recommendation, Councillor.
I've got a motion for deferral.
With the motion to defer.
Yes, motion to defer. That council advised the applicant that it defers consideration of the application and that it believes the following changes would lead to a better design solution. One,
Just a moment, Councillor. If you're moving a motion to defer, and that's what you're doing, the local law says there can be no discussion. You're now trying to discuss.
no, I'm reading the 4 points on the basis of which I'd like to defer the motion.
The procedural motion to defer is that you are moving a motion to defer, not giving reasons why you wanted to defer.
This is not reason.
Because local law 3 says that there will be no discussion.
This is not discussion, Mr Mayor, this is my deferral.
You are discussing
No, I'm
why
not.
you want it
I'm
deferred.
not. This is.
Can I just make one point, if that's okay, just for a bit of clarity between everyone? This is not a motion to defer the, I don't think this is a motion to defer the article, or I don't think it's a motion to defer this particular 10.7. It's a motion to defer the actual application rather than to defer the issue. And I think that's the difference. If the council wants to move it deferring the actual application, then I think she should be heard and we can debate it. It'd only be if we're deferring the actual article itself to defer it to a later date, that would be when we can't have debate. So I think the councillor should be heard.
And so either way I can be heard based on what you've just said.
No, if it's a deferral of the actual motion, then you cannot be heard. But I don't think it is. It's a deferral of the planning permit, so I think you can be heard.
Point of order.
Councillor O'Connor.
I think there's confusion around the procedure. I'd like clarification from the Director of Corporate Services who understands the local laws inside out.
I think we might defer it to the CEO.
If you're okay, Mr Mayor and Mr Chair, I will defer to the Director, who does know this very well. I'll do it faster than I could do it if you gave me 5 minutes longer than Greg. But yeah.
I'm going to say somebody's right. So local law, section 62 deals with procedural motions, one of which is to defer, which is at part G. And on the question of reading the motion out, it says that an item of business may be deferred to later in the same meeting or a future date or time or location, or, and this is the relevant part, a future meeting subject to a condition precedent. So that means that an item could be deferred for a future report or some other condition. So if the part that you're about to read out is relevant to deferral to do a certain thing or to find out some information or to do something before it comes back, then that would be an essential part of the deferral motion, because we would need to know what that thing is that you need us to do before proceeding. So in that condition precedent, I think that would be a valid part of the motion.
Can I just clarify then? I thought that we could have a debate after that, but if that's the case, then we cannot debate it after the councillor reads the motion.
Through the Mayor. So the answer to that is in two parts. The first part is that there is a procedural motion to defer under section 62 of the local law that quite strictly says that the procedural motion isn't debated. It's moved, seconded, vote, done. So that's part two. Part one, there's three parts to this. Part two is that there has been a bit of a practice with this council over the years that the mayor and the council at the time have allowed some debate despite that rule, and that is up to the chair of the meeting to rule on that. And part three is that it is at the mayor's discretion as to how the mayor wants to run the meeting and decision on point of order. So I think I've just eloquently kicked it back to you, Mr. Mayor.
I just want to get this straight. If Councillor Price reads the notes attached to the deferment motion, will the matter still be debated? Or can the matter still be debated? Or does it go to a seconder and then a vote?
So I believe that Councillor Price was trying to read out the full motion, which contained the condition precedent, which gave guidance as to what needed to happen before the deferred item came back in. So if that is a condition precedent of things that need to be done before this item could be considered again, then I would say quite clearly that that needs to be part of the motion. It's not optional, it needs to be part of the deferral motion. To your question about notes to the motion, I would say no. I think it's a clean deferral motion and should be moved. If there's a seconder, there should be a vote, is my suggestion to you.
And no debate?
And no debate.
You've just said that it's up to the mayor to run the meeting how he wants.
Yes.
So you could...
I'll just say this, that with deferral motions in the past, mayors have not referred to it as a deferral motion. They've just taken it as an amendment to the motion. So it's been debated. I'm very happy to listen to your motion, Councillor Price.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. So the motion is that Council advise the applicant that it defers consideration of the application and that it believes the following changes would lead to a better design solution. 1, combine the proposed allotments 3, 4, 5 and 6 into 2 allotments, and that these 2 allotments be shown with building envelopes on the south side of the high bank adjacent to the main road. 2, that the proposed allotment 7 be restricted with a design guideline ensuring that the house presents a front facade to both the northwest and northeast frontages to the satisfaction of the responsible authority. 3, all boundary fencing is to be restricted to rural post and wire fencing to the satisfaction of the responsible authority. 4, the application includes a request for council to enter into a Section 173 agreement to prohibit further subdivision.
Just a question, Councillor. Part of what you've read out is in the Section 173 agreement now.
Do you mean about prohibiting further subdivision?
There's that. There's also about the fencing, open style post and wire fencing. That's all in the Section 173. So
as you can see, that some of that is included and some is not. So that's why it's a new motion for deferral.
could you tell me what is in your motion that's not in the 173 agreement?
Point 1 for a start.
To ensure that each lot created is not able to be further subdivided?
No, to combine the proposed allotments 3, 4, 5 and 6 into 2 allotments.
All right. Do we have a seconder? So a seconder by Councillor O'Connor.
Can I put the reaction talk? I'll put that the mayor considers that we actually talk to the motion. It's up to you. Request that they're allowed.
I've just decided that. So you've seconded the motion. You can speak to the motion, Councillor Price.
Again, this is to try and reflect some of the community sentiment. This is to try and resolve to a better solution than approving the original proposal. So that's what I've put before you.
So, Councillor O'Connor.
The current property sizes are, I believe, 400 square metres. Is that right? No, on the proposal, the current ones that are in existence are 4,000 and that's part of the issue, is that these are they're literally half the size of the current land sizes there now, land parcels. By doing this amendment, given that the refusal has failed, at least by combining the allotment sizes, they are then in keeping with the current lot sizes there of 4,000 metres for most of those blocks, which I think is at least some. It keeps it in. It allows the development to be more in keeping with what is currently in existence there, and therefore less of an impact than if the development as it was proposed were to go ahead.
Councillor Trenery?
I have a feeling we might be debating this 3 times, but I still stand by, you know, as a council we have to accept our responsibilities by duck shoving this off to VCAT. And I understand what Councillor O'Connor's saying, but I have a view that we have a responsibility as councillors to deal with this and not pass it over to VCAT, and that's exactly what's going to happen.
Councillor Goldsworthy?
Well, it's obvious to all, but they're not making any more land, apart from the Chinese and the Pacific, but by and large in Australia, they're not making any more land. And so the availability of land is about supply and demand. And what will happen is that prices will continue to increase if we don't allow subdivisions in appropriate areas. This has been zoned for a very long time now for rural development and rural living. It's something that's allowed. 12 lots means that maybe somebody's son or daughter can return to Yackandandah and can afford to do it. They can live in a place that they want to live in. It might be friends that want to live there. They may add something to your community. It's not inconceivable that a town may grow. Make the stretch, is it that far different for all those that want to complain about refugees coming to Australia to people in Yackandandah saying we don't want anyone else to come to our town? You know, like, there's going to be development. It may not be what you want, but it is in compliance with our planning scheme. So what I'm saying is that this proposal to defer is deferring the inevitable. What we really need to do is consider it in a timely manner. Don't put ourselves out so that we can be taken to VCAT with because we've failed to make a decision. Because when they go there, all they'll know is that we've put it off and we've got a recommendation from the staff that say we should pass it, and they've addressed every concern for every submission that they've had. So unfortunately, I can't support your motion.
Councillor Price?
As I say, this deferral motion doesn't deal with completely the community sentiment that we've heard, but it tries to go some way in addressing the submissions that we've had. In terms of Councillor Trenery's comments about this being an opportunity for us to duck shove it off to VCAT, not at all. This is an opportunity for us to reflect back to the community that we hear you when you say that we want sensible planning for our towns, and when that is not what is presented to us at council, this is how we should act, and that's what we're trying to present tonight.
All right, we'll put it to a vote. All those in favour of the deferral motion? Lost. Councillor Trenery?
I'd like to move the recommendation also into a motion, please, that council approve the planning permit application 180116, subject to conditions at attached 3, and issue a notice of decision to grant permit.
Do we have a seconder? Councillor Goldsworthy. Councillor Trenery?
This is zone low density, and it is low density development. Staff, we really did pursue staff to have a look at everything that was written, because a lot of people spent time and effort, and we did try to look at something somehow to improve the situation. But the reality is that we have to deal in the legalities of it. The difference between saying what we'd like to do and what the reality is, VCAT is a reality. It is there. We can't steer away from it. We have to deal with it. And the Section 173 agreement that's on there tries to control this development. so we have a better development than if it goes to VCAT. And that's the important issue, is I believe this council should try to take control of this development, all other developments, as much as we possibly can, so we can steer the developer in the right way. I will, happy to sum up at the end with the 173 agreement, but the 173 agreement covers a lot of aspects that some of the concerns were about. I'll just bring it up if I can.
Page 36.
Thank you. Also, probably something that's really apt, so there's an understanding of what we have to deal with, is that having regard to everything that's been above, everything we've spoken about, the provision of the low-density residential zone and the policy direction and decision guidelines of relevant state, local and policy framework from the Indigo planning scheme is recommended that the application be approved subject to the conditions in the 173. We have to deal with that sort of reality. The 173, some of the things that are in the 173 agreement, I won't go through the whole lot, but to ensure each lot is created is not able to be further subdivided, part of what was said earlier, to ensure that all development on lots 2, 3, 6 and 7 is a single story in nature and no greater than 6 metres in height above natural ground level. Ensure that the landscape buffer planted in accordance with the conditions in 4 is maintained in good order to provide an effective visual screen to develop to the development from the Yakandanda Wodonga Road. And there's more to go on with as well. So as a council, I think we've really worked hard to get this development to a point that is acceptable. And I obviously move that we accept the recommendation or the motion.
Councillor Goldsworthy.
We're in a unique position when we sit here to decide permit applications. We're sitting as a quasi-judicial authority. It's incumbent on us to consider the decision guidelines within the planning scheme. Our staff are experts in what they do, particularly in planning. We have to take notice on what the information that they provide us. I get that there have been a number of submissions. Most of those submissions don't address any of the issues that would make us change our mind within the decision guidelines on the planning scheme. So for that reason, it's incumbent on us to look at the circumstances and apply them to the scheme. And for me, my recommendation is that we adopt this motion as it stands.
So Councillor O'Connor.
We have had an opportunity tonight to do our job as councillors. We have a recommendation here put up by my fellow councillor, Councillor Price, that simply says to go back to the developer and say, due to the concerns of this community, that we should be asking them to reduce the subdivision amounts so that the land parcels are the same as those that are currently in existence. It is worth noting that, yes, it has always been zoned as low-density rural living. However, the size of what that once was has changed from when it was 4,000 square metres to now 2. So in fact, we are saying that the title of the zoning hasn't changed, but the application of that zoning has changed, and that will materially impact on the way this development looks. I would just simply say to my fellow councillors tonight, you have an opportunity here to go back to that developer to say very clearly, yes, go ahead, you can develop this land, but in line with the concerns of this community, you could do that in such a way where you will still make a tidy profit, and you will also cause less damage and less impact to the fabric and the character of this community. Now, he may refuse to do that, but we could at least try. That is what the motion that we voted against before was doing, and I am suggesting that right now you've got an opportunity to reconsider your position and to think hard about whether or not you should stand up for the community that's sitting here with us tonight, that has asked us to take very seriously their concerns and to at least go back to the developer and say, we want you to consider this. You can still go ahead and develop it. All of the things that you said were true. We do need development. We do need people to have opportunities to come and live in our communities. But the kind of development that goes on in Wodonga is not the same as what should happen in Yakandanda, and they are the same planning schemes that apply. So I would ask you to reconsider.
Would anybody else like to speak to the motion? Councillor Price.
Again, I would say that this is well within our remit to make every attempt to ensure that this planning application does not go ahead. This is not sensible planning. It does not fit in with the current precedent that is set in that area. And as Councillor O'Connor alluded to, there have been changes to that zoning in terms of the minimum lot size, depending on what services are available. So those are changes that have probably got ahead of us. And if we'd had perhaps more resources in our planning department, we could have made an amendment to the planning scheme in relation to this, but we haven't. So that is something that we absolutely need to take into consideration, that we should not be hamstrung by this. We should still take into account sensible planning. And this is not a 12-lot subdivision on this site is in no way sensible planning.
Councillor Trenery.
Just very quickly, we've sort of done the whole lot of it, but some of the things that we could lose going to VCAT is in the Section 173 agreement in regards to fencing, in regard to offsets, in regards to biodiversity. All these things are accountable in the 173 agreement that our staff, the experts in this, have negotiated with the developer. I think they've done a fantastic job. They are experts. There is laws that we have to apply to. VCAT is a reality, and we should know that, and we should take on our responsibilities as a council and do the best that we can.
I now put the motion. All those in favour? Carried.
Division.
All those in favour? Councillor Trenery, Goldsworthy, Gaffney, Murdoch. Those against, O'Connor, Price. Item 11.1. The recommendation is the council notes the report and the outcomes of the 2018-2019 swimming pool season, continues the existing early morning swimming and season extension arrangements at the Yakandanda and Rutherglen pools, confirms the introduction of 5 morning swimming days per week at the Beechworth swimming pool for future seasons, confirms the introduction of early morning swimming at Beechworth swimming pool for 4 weeks after the scheduled season closed for future seasons, endorses the decision-making process for free entry days. Moved by Councillor Goldsworthy. Seconded by Councillor Murdoch. Councillor Goldsworthy.
Yeah. Well, our swimming pools are a very important asset to the community. Well, there you go. And look, whilst they are quite an expensive thing to run, they're very important for the health and fitness of our community by understanding the recommendations that have been made, that we increase the swimming days, the morning swimming. We can certainly support our community more in their efforts to swim. It's been a good report, so I thank the staff for the thoroughness of it. As always, if we can get more people in our pools, the better off we'll be.
Councillor Murdoch.
Yes, I agree with Councillor Goldsworthy. The swimming pool service is a vital service for our small towns, for mothers, especially in these sort of areas where the towns are so spread. To get access to other pools in Wodonga and Wangaratta is pretty much impossible for a lot of people, especially if you've got children. It's also older people who benefit as well, because we have a lot of people that are swimming there for exercise, which is keeping us in the community for longer and making us brighter, and I can add me to one of those people. It's also a relatively low-cost activity, and, you know, where else can you take a child for the whole day for the price of an entry fee into a swimming pool? It means that they have activities that are happening with their fellow kids. You know, it's where we can keep an eye on those kids. If they didn't have a community pool, many of them would have to just basically hang around on a really hot day, and that's not a good thought for them. And I think, as I said, it's also the older people who enjoy the pools. Quite often there's quite a big group over the whole Shire that have exercises in the morning, well, not so much exercises, but the swimming in the morning to keep themselves fit. So pools are a pretty good and vital part of our development or our community, and I think we should keep them. And I also see that we endorses the decision for making process for free entry days, because some days the pools are just, the temperature is so hot that this is the only relief many people get from the heat. And for those people that are a little bit unable to afford even the price of a pool, this makes it a certainty that nobody is left out.
Would anybody else like to speak to the motion? Councillor Price?
Just to say that I really like the direction that our pools are heading in. We've always talked about the cost to council to subsidise pools, but now we're making lots of measures to try and decrease that cost, but also open the pools up for more people. And as Councillor Murdoch alluded to, the free entry days show that we're really taking a strategic approach with our pools to say that they can actually be a cool relief site on our hot days. And the attendance numbers show that there are still members of our community that aren't accessing our pools as regularly as they possibly could be, because they do on those hot days. And so that's still a population of people that we'd like to get regularly using the pools, thanks to the staff that prepared the report.
Would anybody else like to speak to the motion? Councillor Goldsworthy? I'll now put the motion. Is anybody against? Carried. 12.1, the future use of the plate. Councillor Price.
Mr Mayor, I'd like to move an alternate motion that the Plate Layers Cottage in Harper Avenue, Beechworth, not be retained for long-term lease as a property available for leasing commercial terms, and that council does not approve expenditure to be included in the 2019-20 budget.
Happy to second that.
So just with the motion, what happens to the building?
Well, I think we've just got a seconder. I think you can leave that question till a bit later, till we hear what the mover is going to state. What's not clear?
It says that we don't retain it for long-term commercial use and that we don't spend the money. I'm just wondering what we do with the building if we're doing those things.
I'm sure we'll come to that. Councillor Price?
It would return to council for a decision.
Can we have that in the motion?
This is my motion, Councillor Goldsworthy.
It's
You
clear.
can
It's certainly
comment
clear
as
to
to-
me, Councillor. Yeah. But Councillor Price.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The Plate Layers Cottage has quite the history in terms of its time with council. I've been trying to find out some information about when it was last tenanted, and it appears that was in 2009. After that time, it was squatted in and since then has just been left to demolition by neglect. In 2000, so the councils of those days should have dealt with this at that point in time. In 2015, there was a resolution of council to demolish. For some reason, that was not acted upon, and so the saga with this building continues. Out of a small renewal budget, this is a huge spend. Within the original recommendation, it highlights $180,000, but the real figure to bring it up to a commercial tenancy standard is $300,000. Across the Shire, we have strategic heritage assets that we should be putting money into. This spend is of no strategic benefit to council. As I say, it has been untenanted for 10 to 15 years. I think that this money would be better spent on other assets, and to name a few within Beechworth, the town hall, for example. But I just can't rationalise the thought that we would spend $300,000 to bring this building up to a commercial tenancy standard, but then it would be of no benefit to the community.
Councillor Trenery.
I'll reserve my right, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Goldsworthy.
Sorry, could you just clarify the figure to bring it up to commercial tenancy? You say it's $180,000 just to restore it, and then was there an additional 120 to bring it up to commercial?
So the figures that I've seen, there's 180,000 included in that report. I've also seen figures of 190,000, and then there was a guess as to the second part to be funded in a later budget, in at least one other budget.
I've got a question too. Could I ask a question? So, with the recommendation, what that says is we're going to spend $180,000 to bring it up to scratch, and then we've got to fit out the interior in coming budgets, which, who knows, there's no set amount. So we're going to spend all of this money on a heritage building to bring it up to scratch for a commercial lease on commercial terms. So what you could have is some dude coming up from Melbourne looking for a place to rent. Oh, that place looks really good, moves in. So the only thing that the community could see is if they drive past or walk past to say, oh, that's that heritage cottage. I wonder what it was like. I wonder what it's like. So there's no benefit for the community. We're going to spend up to $300,000 of the community's money to lease it out to a stranger. Is that what this is about? Or the recommendation?
Yeah, that's correct.
So I do have another question. So I'm just wondering about, on page 68, I'm just trying to clarify this, option B, where it says estimate $180,000 external and $87,000 internal for a total spend of $267,000. So is that correct, or are you saying it's $300,000?
As I said, Councillor Goldsworthy, I've seen figures for 190 for the first budget allocation, and then there will be subsequent budget allocations. Who knows whether 300 is even the limit?
Could I ask a question of the CEO? CEO, is your report in here on this accurate, or is it, or should it be amended to reflect $300,000?
Councillor, the figures we have in here, which I think is on page 68, talks about our estimate that we have in here to restore externally and not do any of the fit out was $180,000. And to bring it up to a commercially leasable stage, we're estimating another 87. So it's figures here are 267,000. So I mean, you could hard round that up to 300 if you wanted to, but that's the figure we're quoting from the officer's point of view.
I have further questions I'd like to ask of the CEO.
Yeah,
So
And sorry, there is
Could I just have a follow-up question on your question?
Sure.
there is a further quote in that option B, which talks about an additional 22 that might be needed for further internals and skillions under a commercial arrangement, possibly. But those three figures there are what we've got in the report, so I'll stand by those.
I just wondered why in the recommendation on part 3, which has been scrapped, but it said, council notes that a second stage of funding will be required. There's no amount, and I just feel uncomfortable voting on something that says a second stage of funding when no amount is there. Like, you wouldn't know how far it might blow out.
So, Mr. Chair, the reason that was there, which is not part of the motion now, as I understand it, so that was part of the recommendation, but not part of the motion.
That's right.
So the recommendation was seeking council approval to at least restore the external part of the building to stop further deterioration. So this was looking for approval to do that at least, but we wanted to have in the motion that it be clearly understood that that didn't bring it up to the standard that would then allow it to be leased out. So we just wanted to note that in the recommendation that 180,000 would do the bare minimum, but there would be more works required to get it to a commercial lease standard. The report itself includes some estimates about what that might be, but that wasn't included in the recommendation because we weren't looking for approval to spend the second stage. It was just to note at this stage.
I have a question on those figures and on the question that Councillor Goldsworthy started with, if we can. The 289,000 that you spoke about, which was the 87,000 and the 22,000 on top of that, you said that you've got is it a confirmed quote, a solid quote, that someone's going to do the work for that price?
Councillor, I might just throw that to our engineering director who's closer to that information than me.
Through the Mayor, no, look, it's not a quote. We certainly don't go and get quotes willy-nilly for works that aren't at this stage genuine. So no, they're cost estimates.
That's right. Councillor Murdoch, did you have your hand up?
I do have follow-on questions.
Oh, yeah, yep, okay.
So I'm just wondering about the difficulty that the staff will face from a reputational perspective if this building is allowed to fall down by neglect. Do you envisage there be any issues?
I mean, I think I'd be speculating if I answered that. I don't know. I mean, it's something that people could, some could accuse us of that. I guess I couldn't give a definitive one way or the other. It's probably a matter of opinion. Sorry if that's as vague as I'm going to be on that one.
Councillor Murdoch?
Yeah, no, I was just, is this the only option that we have for this plate layers cottage? Is there other options that we can pursue? And if so, will we pursue them if this fails to get up?
For example, could we ask community groups whether they would like to take over the refurbishment, perhaps with some in-kind help from council, perhaps? But I just think this derelict building has got a heritage overlay. The council's going to do it up and spend $300,000 so that we can rent it to somebody to live in. Surely that's not core council business.
Are we speaking to the motion?
That's right, Councillor O'Connor. There's just been some questions.
Oh, okay.
There were questions.
When you're ready, I'd like to speak to them.
Sure. Would anybody like to speak to? No, has the second, have you spoken? Oh, no, you've reserved your right. Yeah. Councillor O'Connor?
Okay, so who at this table knows what the vision for Indigo Shire is? Hands up. I'll read it to you. Indigo, Heritage Shire, bold future. In the Heritage Shire. Okay, so I will now quote to you from the Heritage Advisor's report. This cottage is significant. It is a rare surviving example of railway housing within the region. It goes on to say a number of things. The approximate cost of restoration is reasonable, especially when taken into account that little has been spent on it over the last 10 years or so, or more, I would say. The breakdown of costs includes getting it up to a standard where we would get a return on that cottage. So no one is suggesting we just fix it up and leave it. It's about fixing it up and then getting it rented out either for commercial or residential use, of both of which there is a high need at the moment within the Shire. I am taking the advice in the same way as I would take the advice of a climate scientist that knows more than I do about climate change. I reckon the Heritage Advisor knows more than I do about what is of heritage value in this Shire. The fact that it doesn't look good and it's not very impressive does not actually in any way have any relevance as to the heritage of it, in the same way as we might look at Aboriginal artefacts or a piece of broken pottery and go, well, what's that mean? It can have enormous significance. And in this case, according to the person that we see as a person with great expertise, this is a very significant building. Therefore, as a Shire that says we are a heritage Shire, I just can't, again, in conscience say, well, let's just let the thing fall down or bulldoze it because we don't think it looks very important. It's actually not about that. It's about, is it of heritage value? Yes, it is. It's going to cost to restore it. We have a responsibility to look after the heritage of this Shire. Sometimes that costs money, sometimes it doesn't. In this case, we're very fortunate that we can get a return on it, so we can have a win-win. We can restore the cottage and we can actually pay that restoration off over the next few years. And I think I can't in conscience say, yeah, let it fall down or be bulldozed, because those of us sitting at this table don't actually understand the heritage value of it. It's actually, it's immaterial as to whether or not it is of heritage value. We've been told it is. I believe we have to listen to that advice.
Would anybody else like to speak to the motion? Councillor Goldsworthy.
It's an ugly building.
It's a shocker. I get
It is, and it's been derelict for so long, and it disappoints me. But I cannot, in good conscience, be part of the Indigo Shire that says we are a heritage Shire and watch our asset just fall to pieces. And in this motion, there is nothing to address what we do. Do we just leave it there and let it fall down completely? Do we wait until somebody sets fire to it? Do we bulldoze it ourselves? We can't sell it. It's Crown land. Even if we could sell it, the money would go to the state government, not to us. It's going to cost us money to push it down. I don't know. We do have a responsibility to preserve the heritage that's left, not just for us, but for future generations. And in concurrence with Councillor O'Connor, it hurts, but we've got to restore it. It's our obligation to those that have gone before us and those that will come after us. Yeah, there's better things to spend our money on right now. But yeah, I think we'll be a joke. Honestly, we will be a joke. And it wouldn't surprise me if tomorrow's article was all about how we are a joke if we don't support this.
Yeah, just a question for you, Councillor. Talking about a joke, here is something that belongs to Indigo Shire. It's a heritage building. The Heritage Advisor, as Councillor O'Connor really put, is of such significance that shouldn't it go to the community? Surely we don't do it up, spend 300 grand, argue, if you like, whether we spend more or less, for someone to come and rent it as a residence. So the councillors, the community can walk past and say, gee, I wonder what that's like. That, I think, would be the joke.
Can I ask a
thanks
question?
for asking the question.
Sorry, Councillor O'Connor.
No, you asked me a question. I'll answer it.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Well, no, I would have to disagree here because whilst the community might ask for it, the options are, do we lease it out commercially? Do we lease it out privately? We've got figures that support leasing it out, and over time, and albeit 20 years' time, we should see a commercial return and then a benefit. I think what the community have voiced to us when they've been asked, and overwhelmingly they've supported keeping it, and that is that we keep it. They haven't said one way or the other. Yes, some would like to use it for the community, but by and large they want to see it kept.
Can I ask a question of the Mayor?
Councillor?
In relation to your comment, Mr Mayor, are there other buildings that are of heritage significance in this Shire that are either lived in as residences, rented out as businesses, or rented out as commercial or residential properties?
That belong to the Shire? I don't know of any.
No, I'm not saying belong to the Shire.
This is what this is about, councillor, not about buildings. This is a building, as I said right at the start, that belongs to Indigo Shire Council. That's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about private enterprise. They can do whatever they like, but this belongs to the Shire. We went out for consultations. 86% of members of the community want it preserved. So
wouldn't we
all
preserve
I'm
it?
saying, excuse me, all I'm saying is, why would we spend $300,000 on a building to rent it out to somebody? And who we don't know? You say commercial, it could end up an Airbnb. You wouldn't know where it was going to go.
So
And
my,
there are no
my question,
safeguards. But the motion is not about the recommendation. There's a separate motion.
Mr Mayor, can we get on with the debate?
Would anybody else like to speak to the motion? I think everyone has spoken, apart from...
Mr Mayor, can I ask a question for clarity if I can?
Just as long as it's just a question, CEO.
Mr Mayor, I promise not to contribute to the debate. I do, as the person that needs to implement the recommendation, I just need a bit of clarity if I can, because the first line of the recommendation was that the cottage be retained for long-term use on commercial terms. I think the motion inserts the word "not be retained." Is it not be retained for long-term commercial use on commercial terms, or are you saying that it just not be retained, period? So I just want clarity on that, because if we go with that current recommendation, not retained for commercial terms, then that leaves open it's still retained for other use. But if you're saying this actually not be retained, then I have much more clarity about what I do next with the resolution, should it be adopted tonight. That's all.
The resolution is that it not be retained on commercial terms.
So it could be retained for other use, community use or residential lease is what you're... Yep, okay. Thank you.
Councillor Trenary.
If we're quite ready, I suppose. Debating in council is absolutely fantastic. It really is. You hear so many different things from one motion to the next. I did hear we have to listen to our experts, listen to the people, especially if it's got to do with climate change. You listen to the scientists. Heaven forbid if you're a planning expert. We're not meant to listen to those apparently. But we go to the budget. We talk about budgets, and we've only got so much money, so we can't do everything. You know, and we're and as much as the vision, although it took us half a day to come up with that vision, I think is absolutely fantastic. The vision does include heritage because we've got so much of it. We could spend millions and millions and millions of dollars in this Shire and our heritage. We have to prioritise at some stage. We've got halls that need work. We've got halls that need work and will get used by the community as an asset. We've got courthouses that need work and will be used by the community as an asset. That's the important thing. At some stage we have to prioritise. We have to prioritise in our budget, and we all spoke about that and understood it. And we come to this, and the 289,000 as a guesstimate, I didn't realise that. So I think 300,000 is an understatement. It will be an understatement. That'll get up to 350, it'll be closer to 400,000 before it's done, if 289 is a guesstimate. I've been here for 6 years, I've seen it time and time again. It'll be closer to 400 than it will be 300. But we have to prioritise some things. And that's what we're doing here today. I don't see this as a priority compared to other things. I don't think it's a joke. We don't have endless money. I don't think the ratepayers think that we've got a big bucket of money. We just pull money out of it at any stage and we can do any project at any stage. It's not realistic. We have to make choices. And the choice is, what I'm going to say is 300,000. It will be more than that. 300,000 spent on this or spent on other assets, heritage assets. We've got a town hall in the middle of Beechworth that needs work. We've got a room sitting above where our old council used to be that needs work. All these things will be fantastic community assets, but if we spend money on absolutely everything that comes in front of us or through emotion or because someone's angry or whatever, we won't have these dollars to spend on community assets. We have to prioritise. And I think based on that, I recommend the motion.
Councillor Price.
In my time on council, I've taken a lot of interest in heritage, and I've seen a discussion play out where we talk about heritage and it as a tourism product, and the fact that we have to be really selective in where we put our money towards the strategic priorities of telling the stories of our Shire. This is not a strategic priority in terms of our heritage, and we would be telling no story by spending $300,000 to lease this property to a commercial tenant. Generally, when we embark on such an application with a heritage product like this, we match it with grant funding and we have a strategic purpose for the site. This has been a problem with the conversation we've been having about this building, is that there is no strategic purpose behind it. There is no intent. We are just trying to solve a problem that councillors have been putting off resolving since at least 2009. But that does not guilt me into making a $300,000 decision to bring this building up to a commercial tenancy standard. Now, I'm aware that we asked the staff to go away and do some community consultation, and I was astounded when it came back that 86% said that they would like the building preserved, because I thought, well, I don't think the community got the whole story there. And the question that they were asked in consultation was, would you like the building retained or demolished? Well, my answer to that, Mr Mayor, is yes, I would like it retained. But if I know the figures surrounding that, then I'm less interested. And if this is not a spend within my town, I might become even more disinterested. And for people outside of Beechworth, I think that the community is unaware that we are about to make this decision, largely. So on that basis, I can't spend $300,000 to bring this up to a commercial tenancy standard to be of no community benefit to the Indigo Shire.
I now put Councillor Price's motion. All those in favour? Carried. Item 12.2, the recommendation is that Council endorses the draft response recovery and waste management strategy 2019 to be placed on public exhibition for a period of 1 month. Notes the associated background report and draft action plan, which will be exhibited alongside the draft strategy. Would somebody like to move that recommendation? Moved by Councillor O'Connor, seconded by Councillor Murdoch. Councillor O'Connor.
Just very briefly, this is a very important strategy. I think, as we saw today from the questions from Mr McLeish in the public forum, waste resource recovery, the costs of that, how we go. You know, roads, rates and rubbish are always seen as the core business of council. As you see tonight, we often have to deal with a range of other issues, but this is very important. And given the issues globally at the moment around how we manage recycling, what we do with our waste management, the cost to council, and I just think that it is very important that this goes out for the community to have a look at, and we would welcome your input.
Councillor Murdoch?
Yes, no, I absolutely agree with that comment. It is important. As time goes by, we're getting more and more waste and less space to dump it into. We need a strategy that actually makes it so that eventually, and hopefully eventually, we have a circular economy. But at the present moment, we have to do the best with what we've got. We've got problems overseas with where we used to send our waste, but we do have to really look hard at it. And this document actually has a good hard look at it, and I recommend it to the council.
Would anybody else like to speak to the motion? Councillor Trenery?
I have had a habit not to speak for or against these because they're going out to public, because that's all this motion is about. But I hope they have a good look at it, and I'll certainly be having a lot to say when it comes back.
Councillor Price?
I've participated in this strategy, making it to this point alongside Councillor Shepherd, and I'd like to particularly acknowledge our staff member Jill Croom, who has done an enormous amount of work in getting it to this point, and as Councillor Trenery said, turn it over to you, the community, to be a part of our discussion about resource recovery and waste management, which is, as we've all alluded to, part of a much bigger discussion that we're having about waste.
Would anybody else like to speak to this motion? Councillor O'Connor? I'll now put the motion. Is anybody against? Carried. Item 13.1, the recommendations. The council receives the attached unconfirmed advisory committee minutes. Would somebody like to move that recommendation? Moved by Councillor Trenery, seconded by Councillor Murdoch. Councillor Trenery?
I think I say the same thing every time I have moved this. It is so important that we have these advisory committees. We don't always agree with everything they do, but that's the point of having them there as well. They are a wealth of knowledge and they work hard in our community. So I think it's a fantastic thing that the minutes come here to be confirmed.
That's right, Councillor Murdoch.
Yeah, I'd just like to confirm that and our appreciation for those people that work on these committees, because, 7 of us and not the whole council. There's a whole lot of people out there that are helping us, and I think it's fantastic that they do that work.
Would anybody else like to speak to the motion? Is anybody against the motion? Carried. Item 13.3, the recommendation is that council adopts the attached confidentiality policy. Would somebody like to move that recommendation? Move. No, I've done that. Moved by Councillor Goldsworthy, seconded by Councillor O'Connor. Councillor Goldsworthy.
Ooh, this policy's been thrashed around a fair whack. Not sure how the CEO is feeling about it, because I'm sure there's a sense of relief if it gets passed. We've moved more to a principles-based policy. It's less prescriptive. I believe it's something that we can pretty well understand and go along with. And certain items do need to remain confidential, and then there is the public's right to know, and we should be putting that out. And so this means that for those items that are considered in a confidential sitting of council, there will always be a recommendation one way or the other as to when that information should be released, or if it is to remain confidential. Ordinarily, those items that should remain confidential would relate around personal circumstances or the contracting or other contracting prices, that sort of thing. So it is important that we keep some things to ourselves, but I'd like to see most things go out to the public.
Councillor O'Connor.
I think getting the balance between allowing us to have free, frank and robust and even heated discussions at times is important for us as councillors. We need to be able to do that. and to trust that we can do that in confidence, and that we balance that with making sure the community gets access to all of the information that we are able to provide them in a fair and reasonable way. And sometimes we have to work together first before things are ready for release. Sometimes they're released before we're ready to deal with them, and that's just the way it works. So this gives us some guidelines, and I think by all means read it. If you feel that it's unreasonable in any way, let us know. But this has been a big attempt on behalf of the CEO and councillors and staff to try and come up with something that really does get that balance right. It's probably not perfect, but I think it does give us all some pretty clear guidelines about how to behave ethically with each other and make sure that the community does get the information and the transparency that I think we're all pretty committed to doing. So I commend the policy.
Would anybody else like to speak to the motion? Councillor Trenary?
I'd just like to congratulate also everyone involved. I did make a statement in a debate, I'm not sure if it was in public or not, saying if this comes back and doesn't go through, this room's not working properly. I think, without preempting anything, that this room's working properly. This has been a success, so congratulations to all involved.
Is anybody against the motion? Carried. The Mayor's Diary. Any questions? Item 16.1 the Decisions Register. Item 17, General Business. Does anybody have any general business? Councillor O'Connor?
This is just to put on the record, I would like an update on the NECMA land in Kiwitan, Gambalanga to come back to council, and for that, just so I've had approaches from a member of the community over there to say what is going on. We have allocated budget to this piece of land. We have been working closely with the Catchment Management Authority, but I think it's important that the public has an update about where that's up to. So I'm just putting it on the record so that it will be dealt with at the next council meeting or be in the minutes. And hopefully we will be seeing access to the Kiwi River for the people of that community sometime before I die, sometime in the near future. Okay. Yes, I hope that's a long time.
Councillor O'Connor? Councillor Goldsworthy? Oh, no.
That's the second time.
Oh, no.
At least you're not calling me Gaffney. That's happened before. Look, I raised it at the briefing meeting, just the local government bill that's due to come before us. Just request that the CEO have a look at the implications for our council and that we address those sooner rather than later, that we have a discussion and provide feedback within a timely manner, and that timely manner I think finishes in a couple of weeks.
Any other general business? I'd just like to mention, I'd just like to mention two things. Excuse me. First of all, I'd like to thank the Minister for Northern, Tanya Maxwell, for arranging a meeting with the Minister for Health and Ambulance Services, with the CEO and myself in early August. And the other general business, I would like to thank my fellow councillors for the passion and vigour of the debate tonight. The agenda was 837 pages. You've all worked diligently, and if anybody says you get your allowance pretty easy, they don't know what they're talking about. I now declare the meeting closed, but Robin, if you'd like to say something, you're more than welcome. No. Well, if that's what you read from it, you should read the agenda. I mean, you should read the motion. It doesn't say that. Yeah. The meeting's closed.